It's no secret that I believe we're in the last days, and that Jesus had said that when it comes to the end of the age, he indicated that the number one thing was false Christ, false prophets, deception. Be careful that you're not deceived. And I do believe we are entering into an age of deception. So I thought I would talk about something that I learned over the years. I became a Christian in 1995, and I became a Christian in a Pentecostal church. And over the years, I kind of bounced around, and I started to see things that that concerned me, that just didn't seem right. And as I looked into it and learned and growed and matured, there were things that I'm just like, okay, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. So the number one thing that, in my opinion, is submission. One thing that Jesus said that I found interesting, and one thing that I now realize that I wasn't doing, and a lot of people in the churches that I bounced around in my early years as a Christian did not do. And that is when Jesus was walking the earth before he ascended, the number one group of people that he butt heads with were the Pharisees. And the Pharisees were the religious leaders of the day. Well, I should say they were the religious leaders of the Hebrew faith, which Jesus is the Messiah, the fulfillment of the Hebrew religion. And he said, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law sit in Moses' seat, and therefore you do what they tell you to do, but do not do what they do. And that's an interesting thing. Because they sit in Moses' seat, you need to submit to them. But because they are hypocrites, don't do what they do. And that's one thing that, looking back now, let's see, 95, it's 23, almost 30 years, 28 years of being a Christian. I look back over those years, and that's kind of the number one problem I believe is going on in a lot of these different denominations. Everybody's butting heads. They're butting heads over doctrines, over teachings. Everybody has these little kingdoms that they are trying to control and keep other people from coming in and controlling. You have the kingdom of the worship team. You have the kingdom of the Sunday school. You have the, this and that, and I'm the one that's in charge of the potlucks, not you. Somebody reads their Bible and they get a little tingle and they hear from God, and, oh, Pastor, you gotta change this and you gotta change that. And he's like, no, I'm not, because of this and that. And then, okay, fine, I'm going to start my own church, and it's going to be the true church. And so you get split after split after split, division after division after division. And what did Jesus say? A house divided against itself cannot stand. And it appears to me that this is definitely a tactic of Satan to divide God's house time and time and time again. And for a while, after years of enduring this, and I believe it was around 2008, maybe 2010, right around there, I just was burnt out, disheartened. I didn't want to stop being a Christian. I just wanted to stop going to church. I was sick and tired of I got manipulated a lot, because with all these little kingdoms, you need volunteers, and so you manipulate. everybody around you to get them to volunteer to be one of your lackeys in your kingdom. Serf, I need you. You must volunteer for this and that and everything else. And so it kind of degenerates into a cult of personality where the pastor is the center orbit and everything revolves around the pastor, and then you have these satellites all around them, these other little kingdoms. And kind of like Game of Thrones, these little kingdoms will butt heads with the pastor, and then you've got people below them that are trying to jockey for a position. And it's just, I thought Christ was our focus. I thought Jesus was our focus, but instead it's infighting. And in looking at that and thinking about that, I kind of realized that there's a pride in there. It's a pride of knowing it all, a pride of that I have direct revelation of God, a pride of that I am the one who is able to sort these things out, to figure out the Bible code, and everybody needs to listen to me because I. When I started learning of the I guess you could say the ancient churches, the older denominations, however you want to categorize it, I learned of the focus is not the man behind the pulpit, but the focus is the host. It's communion. It's preparing your heart to receive communion. And even though the pastor or the priest or whatever title you give them is important, but they're not central. They're there to serve, to help you prepare your heart to lead the liturgy. And when I seen that, I'm like, yeah, I like that. There's no jockeying for position. There's no cult of personality. One thing over the years that I've also seen is when a pastor leaves a church for whatever reason, could be a good, honorable reason, or it could be bad reason, you'll get further splits and divisions in this, oh, I miss Pastor so-and-so, and I'm going to go to a different church because this new pastor that came in, I don't like them. And again, I thought we were here for Christ. I thought we were here for God. Yeah, I liked this pastor's preaching over this pastor, but we're serving the same God. Why are we going to leave? Why are we going to run away? Why are we going to find the grass is greener on the other side? And it just bothered me. And when I was shown that, hey, there's a different way of doing church, which is actually closer to the original way that church was done, it's like, oh, I get it. And I learned a lot of things going down that vein over the years, which, it really seems to be much better. And this isn't not what I'm talking about here. It's not something where I'm like, you need to leave your church. It's just my experiences over the years, what I've learned, and it's a better way of looking at focusing. And in this age of deception, we need to start really being on our guard and really being aware of things that are infiltrating the church, and be aware of how things were done before when there was more unity. When there was more unity, it's probably something that was very good, and it's something through these divisions and splits that Satan wanted to get rid of, so that it would be easier to cause more divisions, more splits. And in doing so, coming to this age where it's becoming the age of deception, much easier to get those deceptions in. For about 1,000 years, there was only one church on the earth. For about 1,000 years. Now, there's different dates when different things happen. I'm just estimating, I'm just kind of giving a generalization here of around 1,000 years, there was one church. And it was in relative unity. And then there was a big split between the Eastern Orthodox and the Western Catholics. And then for around another 500 years, with the Western Catholic Church, there was relative unity. And there was a lot of similarities between the East and the West, but relative unity. And then there was the Protestant Reformation and so on and so forth. Now, so my view, my opinion is that around the first 1500 years of the church, when there was relative unity, before there was all these major splits and decisions and all this wackiness and confusion being sown among the believers, it's probably very safe doctrine, it's probably very good doctrine, and it's probably things that we as a body of believers should learn, discern, and then submit ourselves to, because these are people that sat in seats of authority. These are teachings that have been tried and tested and was practiced in unity for 1,000 years, possibly even over 1,000 years. And if it was something that was not Christian, I think the body of believers, the church that was in unity, would have weeded it out. I believe a good measuring stick is the Nicene Creed. Now, the Nicene Creed was the source of the first split between the East and the West, where one word was changed. And I'm not going to get in that debate. However, other than that one word, it's still a very good measuring stick to use. And if your church that you are attending now is extremely far from that measuring stick, then you probably should look for one that's closer to that measuring stick. And that the creed is, I believe in one God, maker, creator of heaven and earth. I believe, Jesus was born of the Virgin, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was dead and buried. On the third day, he rose again. It's a basic, this is what we believe. And if you're going to a denomination that is not in line with that, then I would say it's not Christian, and you really need to find a place that's in line with that. With these, what I call ancient churches, these older denominations that are very close to the one church about 1,000 years ago, you don't really, you'll see it, but it's not near as prominent as Protestant churches, and that's that cult of personality, the pride of being God's oracle. I have heard from God, and it's like, well, we've got this, over 1,000-year tradition and teaching that goes back to and it's the original church, and it's against that, so therefore, no, you haven't heard from God. If it's something that was instituted shortly after Jesus rose again, and the ancient church had established, and it's now 2,000 or close to 2,000 years later, and you're saying God revealed something different, no, don't think so. you need to go take your heretical little behind and leave, because no, if it's something against 2,000 years of a practice of the church, then it's not. There's a denomination out there which I'm not going to name, because this isn't about picking on different denominations, but they have this thing that, well, this is why Jesus hasn't come, and this is why, and it's all about your day of worship and your diet and these things like that, and it's like, no, God 2,000 years ago didn't do something that within the last 50 years or 100 years all of a sudden I've discovered, and no, you are not God's oracle. What you're talking about is probably going to divide, which is what Satan wants. God wants unity, Satan wants division, so God's house cannot stand. And also in those, there's a little bit, but it's really not as prominent, and that is the kingdoms. all jockeying for position and fighting each other and everybody wanting control. It's there. I'm not going to say it isn't, but not near as prominent, because the focus is not a cult of personality, but the focus is the host, the bread, the wine becomes the body and blood of Christ, and that's your focus. It's not the worship team or the Sunday school and that sort of thing. Now, one of the things that we need to submit ourselves to is the teaching of the leadership. One of the things that I came to the realization of over the years is how just because my little pea brain cannot understand something doesn't mean it's not true. You have an infinite God. Infinite. God's mind is infinite. God's power is infinite. And we have a finite mind. We have limited mind. And so there's going to be some things about God that we are incapable of understanding. I mean, you could be the smartest guy on the planet, but your little 3-pound brain is not going to be able to process an infinite God. And so there are a handful of things within the Christian faith that seem kind of confusing, and that over the years you get people who think they need to be able to explain it. And this is where you get error. This is where you have problems. This is where heresies can develop. For example, Jesus was 100% God and 100% man. Now, in our little 3-dimensional world, that's an impossibility. However, God is beyond, outside of our 3-dimensional world, and at times decides to stick his finger or to step into our 3-dimensional world. People try to explain that to where you can understand it, and the truth is, it's a mystery. It's something we are incapable of understanding, which falls in line with, which makes sense, that we have an infinite God. There are going to be things that we are incapable of understanding. There's also the bread and the wine for Holy Communion, the host. That is the flesh of Jesus, and that is the blood of Jesus. Now, there's people, they have to try to figure it out and explain it, and, no, you don't. It's outside of our understanding. And, there's people that, well, once you ingest it in your digestive tract, it becomes. And it's like, no. It is in that mystical, spiritual way that we are incapable of understanding. The same with the Holy Trinity. There's people that there's only one God, and then when the Bible clearly shows that there are three, they say, well, it's the God, teleporting here and teleporting there and doing this, it's just like, no. God is outside of our 3-dimensional world. And when God chooses to step in, well, there's going to be things that we are just incapable of understanding and figuring it out. And so there are three, but there's only one. Oh, that's an impossibility. Yeah, in our 3-dimensional world, that's an impossibility. But God is outside of our 3-dimensional world. And we don't know what things are, the way things are outside of our 3-dimensional world. We only figure out what we have experienced, what we have seen. So, after saying all that, what I'm trying to communicate is that we need to submit ourselves. We need to submit ourselves to the teaching of the church fathers. We need to submit ourselves to the leadership of people who run our churches, regardless of whether we understand it or not. Now, if it's something that's completely heretical, if it's something that does not line up with the Nicene Creed, then that's like, okay, we need to find another church, but find one that is following the Nicene Creed and the teachings align with the Nicene Creed, and ones that aren't, doing heresies, which heresies are something that we can talk about another time. We need to submit ourselves. We need to fight that urge to be prideful, that I know everything and I can explain everything and I am hearing from God and you are not. And it's like, wait a minute, if you've got a church full of people that are seeking the Lord and you're the only one that has this divine revelation, is it because you're so awesome? Or is it because maybe you're prideful? And now you're being tested, and it's not God who's whispering to you, it's somebody else. So, that's, I mean, really, before you go jumping on this, I am so awesome thing, stop. Think about it. You have, who is our example? Who is it that we follow? Well, it's Christ. In 2 Philippians, what does it talk about? It talks about Christ submitting himself to the Father and allowing himself to be humiliated. He submit himself to Pontius Pilate, who was a Gentile, who wasn't even a Christian, who questioned what truth was. But he submitted himself to Pontius Pilate, who instituted a death sentence to be crucified on the cross. He submitted himself. How much more should we submit ourselves to people of authority? We need to submit ourselves. These are the last days. We have false prophets, deception, the Antichrist spirit. And during these last days, more and more, we're going to have Satan wanting to split churches. And how many times does something split from the main branch before it's not the same? Right? Because we are, America's we're Western Christianity. And so I'm more familiar with the Catholic Church. I do know some of the Eastern Orthodox Church, and my wife and I did go to an Eastern Orthodox church for a while, and I loved it. But, I'm more familiar with the propaganda of the Protestants. And this isn't to throw shade. You've got the propaganda of the Catholic and how evil the Protestants were, and the propaganda of the Protestants and how evil the Catholic religion is. And and over the years I've been studying different denominations. Catholic Church is one of them, and you realize it's like, this isn't what they teach. This is what they say they teach, but this really isn't it. So, but how many divisions, how many splits, how many changes from the original can you have before it's not the original anymore? And that's the thing. If you're going to a denomination of a denomination, or you're following practices and teachings that are have been altered from the original and altered again and altered again and altered again and altered again, how many of that before it's no longer the same? And that's why I've come to the conclusion of, well, you want to go to a church that's as close to the original as possible, which if you study, when the church was first instituted, Holy Communion was, the Eucharist was the main focus. Think of it this way, right? Christianity is the fulfillment of Judaism. And so the first Christians, how are they going to do church? Well, they're going to make it very, very similar to temple worship, right? Who instituted temple worship? God. God was the one who designed the tabernacle. And so it's logical that church is going to be very similar to that. And that's, it's like, okay, so the original church, and of course in the writings and the teachings and what archaeology has discovered, yes, it's very similar. However, instead of an animal being physically sacrificed, you have, that's kind of the center of, okay, we're going to sacrifice the animal and sprinkle the blood. Now it's Christ who was our sacrifice. And we're going to remember his sacrifice through Holy Communion, which is the center because that's his body and his blood. And we eat it and we drink it in remembrance of him and what he's done, his shed blood and his flesh. So, Now, if you decide that, oh, no, I need to teach and I need to split this church and all that, just let me give you a word of caution, which is why I believe submission. You need to submit to authority. I need to submit to authority. Church I go to now, there are some things that I'm like, I don't know, but it's like, I need to submit. I gotta stop being a rebel. I gotta stop, finding things wrong with every single thing that, it's like, no church is doing it right, therefore I need to start my own church. You can't have that kind of attitude, especially today in this age of deception, this age of compromise. So just let me leave you with this one thing. Teachers are more accountable to God. So if you're out there and I'm going to split the church and I'm going to, start my own because I'm the only one that's right, A, that's prideful, but B, you're teaching people something that might not be right. And when you stand to face a holy God, who is a God of love and mercy, but also a God of wrath, and he says in his word that teachers are held doubly accountable, you might not have a good day. It might be scary and bad for you. So maybe, instead of, doing all this stuff that's arrogant and prideful, you should submit yourself. Like Jesus said, do as they say, but not as they do. Okay. So I am going to submit myself to them until God and other people, until I get some confirmation. I'm going to study and see what was the original church like. How far are we from the mean? Are we too far? Is that what I'm seeing? Is that what's being revealed? Right? And so instead of splitting, submit. Splitting, submitting. Which one do you think's better? I'd say submitting.